It was a quiet morning in South Carolina when David Carter stepped outside his small brick house. The air smelled heavy, damp like rain, but it hadn't rained that night. His shoes sank slightly into the muddy grass. The sound of frogs and buzzing insects echoed in the distance. He frowned. The yard was wet again. Water was standing where it shouldn't be, near the edge of the fence, by the garden, and even across the road. It looked like the whole street had turned into a shallow pond. For weeks now, David had been watching this strange flooding spread across his neighborhood. The water level rose a little more each day. At first, people laughed it off, just some bad drainage, they said. But soon lawns turned into swamps. Mosquitoes filled the air. And basements began to smell like mold. Something was terribly wrong. David lived in a peaceful suburban area, a place built with promises of safety, beauty, and order. Every house looked clean, every lawn green, and every rule carefully followed. The Homeowners Association, the HOA, controlled everything. They sent warnings for uncut grass, noisy dogs, or the wrong color mailbox. But no one ever thought the HOA could cause something this big. That morning, David grabbed his rubber boots and walked down toward the small creek behind his house, the one that had always carried rainwater away. But as he got closer, his steps slowed. The creek, was gone. Instead of water, he saw concrete. Thick, gray, and rough, poured across the whole bed like a road. The natural stream that once flowed there was completely sealed. He froze. His mind tried to make sense of it. Who did this? He whispered. It looked like someone had filled the entire creek with cement, blocking the water's natural path. The water, with nowhere to go, was now rising back toward the homes as he stood there. An old neighbor, Mrs. Thompson, came out of her house, waving her hand. "David, you seeing this mess?" she shouted. "They filled it up last week. Said it was for safety." David turned. "Who did?" "The HOA," she said, shaking her head. "They said the creek was too dirty, attracting animals. So they fixed it. With cement." David couldn't believe it. The HOA had destroyed the creek, the natural drainage, and called it maintenance. Now, everyone's property was paying the price. Over the next few days, the situation got worse. Water seeped into garages. Wooden fences began to rot. The smell of standing water filled the air. Some residents started putting sandbags by their doors. Others just gave up and stayed inside. David, however, wasn't ready to let it go. He worked hard for this house, his first big purchase after years of saving, and he wasn't going to let a careless decision ruin it. He began taking photos of the flooded lawns, the cracked pavement, the blocked creek. He wrote down dates and times. Every day the swamp grew bigger. But soon, strange things started happening. A warning letter appeared in his mailbox. "Unauthorized activity near community property is prohibited." Another said, "All homeowners are required to trust the HOA maintenance plan." It was as if someone wanted to silence him. David realized he wasn't just fighting water. He was fighting power. The HOA wasn't going to admit its mistake. And the more he spoke up, the more pressure he felt to stay quiet. Late one night, as thunder rolled in the distance, David sat by his window watching the rain pour down. The streets were already half flooded. The water was creeping toward his porch. He whispered to himself, "This isn't nature's doing. Someone did this, and I'll prove it." What David didn't know was that uncovering the truth about that concrete creek would change everything. Because behind the HOA's clean image, there were secrets buried deeper than the concrete itself. The next morning, David woke up to the sound of rushing water, but it wasn't from the creek. It was from the street. Rain from the night before had turned the neighborhood into a shallow lake. Cars stood half submerged, mailboxes reflected in the water like broken mirrors, and lawns looked like muddy rivers. David stepped outside, camera in hand. His phone buzzed with messages from neighbors. "Is your basement flooded too?" "HOA said they're sending maintenance. Don't post about it online, they'll fine you." He shook his head. Fine them? For telling the truth? The situation was out of control. David decided he needed answers. The HOA couldn't just fill a creek with concrete. There had to be a permit, a plan, a paper trail, something. So he changed into dry clothes, grabbed his car keys, and drove toward the HOA's office located near the community clubhouse. When he arrived, the place looked calm. Too calm. A small American flag fluttered in front of a brick building with white columns. Inside, the air smelled like coffee and printer ink. A woman at the desk looked up. "Good morning. How can I help you?" she asked with a bright smile. David cleared his throat. "I'm here about the creek behind Maple Drive. It's been filled with concrete. Do you know who approved that?" The woman's smile flickered for a second. "Sir, all maintenance decisions are handled by the HOA board. I can take your name and they'll get back to you." He leaned forward slightly. "I just need to see the maintenance record. The water's flooding our homes." Ah. She glanced around, lowered her voice, and said, "Off the record. You didn't hear this from me, but the decision came from Mr. Brooks. He's the HOA president. They said the creek was a safety risk." "Safety risk?" David repeated. "It's a natural creek." The woman just shrugged. "Sir, I'd be careful asking too many questions. They don't like homeowners getting involved." David thanked her and left, his mind racing. Mr. Brooks. The name felt heavy in his head. He'd seen that man before at neighborhood meetings, giving speeches about community order and property value, always dressed in neat suits, always calm, always in control. That evening, David attended the monthly HOA meeting. It was held in the same clubhouse where kids used to play and neighbors held BBQs. But tonight, it felt different, tense, quiet, and full of fake smiles. Mr. Brooks stood at the front of the room, hands clasped behind his back. "Let's begin," he said, his voice smooth. "We know some residents are concerned about recent flooding, but I assure you, the situation is under control." David raised his hand. Under control. The creek was filled with concrete. The water has nowhere to go. A few people shifted in their seats. Others looked down, avoiding his eyes. Brooks smiled faintly. That creek was an environmental hazard. It attracted mosquitoes, snakes, and stray animals. The board approved the fill project to protect residents. David's jaw tightened, and now our homes are swamps. "How's that protection?" Brooks' smile faded. "Mr. Carter, please remember that HOA rules forbid unauthorized inspections or accusations. You're creating unnecessary panic." The room went silent. David could feel every eye on him, some sympathetic, others fearful. He wanted to shout, but something in Brooks' tone made him stop. It wasn't just arrogance. It was a warning. After the meeting, as people left, a man quietly slipped a folded paper into David's hand. "You didn't hear it from me," the man whispered, "but there's something in the storage shed behind the clubhouse. You should look." That night, when the neighborhood lights went out and the frogs began croaking again, David returned with a flashlight. He found the small shed locked, rusty, and half-hidden behind overgrown bushes. With a firm push, the old latch snapped. Inside were stacks of folders, maps, and invoices. One file caught his attention. Creek Maintenance Project. 2024? He flipped it open. There it was, a contract signed by Brooks, paying a private construction firm thousands of dollars to fill drainage channels with concrete to increase land uniformity. David's heart pounded. This wasn't safety. It was profit. But before he could take photos, headlights flashed behind him. A voice called out sharply, "What do you think you're doing?" He froze. The real danger had just begun. David froze under the beam of the headlights. His heart thudded so loud it drowned out the crickets. The folder in his hand felt like a ticking bomb. Slowly he turned around. Standing by a black SUV was Mr. Brooks, the HOA president. His figure looked sharp under the dim light, suit pressed, shoes spotless, even at midnight. "Mr. Carter," Brooks said calmly, stepping closer. "You shouldn't be here." David swallowed. "This is public property, community property," Brooks corrected. and only authorized personnel are allowed access after hours.
House.
David held up the folder. You call this authorization? Filling a creek and flooding homes? Brooks' face didn't change. You're making a mistake, David. You're looking at documents you don't understand. Everything we've done is legal. David shook his head. Legal doesn't make it right. Brooks' eyes narrowed. Go home, Mr. Carter, before you make this worse for yourself. Then he turned, walked back to his SUV, and drove off, the tires splashing through shallow puddles. Leaving silence behind, David stood still for a moment, breathing hard. Then he looked back at the shed. He grabbed a few papers, stuffed them into his jacket, and left quickly. That night, he didn't sleep. He sat at his kitchen table, spreading the documents under a dim lamp. Some pages were payment receipts, others construction permits, but one detail made his stomach twist. The construction company, hired by the HOA, had the same address as Brooks' private business. He whispered, he paid himself. The realization hit like thunder. Brooks had used HOA funds, homeowners' money, to fill the creek, probably for profit. Maybe he wanted to sell nearby land or make space for new development. Whatever it wasn't about safety. But what could David do? If he went public, Brooks could sue him. If he went quiet, everyone's home would keep sinking. He picked up his phone and called Sarah Mitchell, a local journalist known for investigating small-town corruption. Her voice was calm but curious. Mr. Carter, you said you have documents? She asked, double quotes, yes. Proof that the HOA president used community money for illegal construction. Sarah agreed to meet him the next evening at a small cafe downtown. The next day felt longer than ever. As David drove to work, he noticed something strange. A white car following him in the rearview mirror. It stayed behind him through every turn, every stoplight. When he finally pulled over, the car slowly passed. And the driver stared right at him, a man in a dark suit with sunglasses. Even though the sky was cloudy, a chill ran through David's chest. That evening, he reached the cafe early. He chose a corner table facing the door. He had the folder in a brown envelope, ready to hand over. Minutes passed. The cafe filled with soft chatter and the smell of roasted coffee. But Sarah never came. He checked his phone, no messages. Then, suddenly it rang. Unknown number, he answered. A deep voice said, "You need to stop, Mr. Carter." Click. The line went dead. David's hands trembled. Someone was watching him, and they knew exactly what he was doing. When he returned home, the front door was slightly open. His heart dropped. He stepped inside carefully. Everything looked normal until he reached his study. The papers were gone. Every document, every note missing. Only one thing remained on the table, a small envelope. He opened it. Inside was a short message typed in bold letters, "You live here because we allow it. Stay quiet." David sat down, staring at the note. Fear mixed with anger. Whoever was behind this wasn't just hiding bad decisions, they were hiding something much bigger. He looked out the window. The streetlights reflected on the swampy water that had now reached the edge of his driveway. The water was rising, so was the danger. David knew there was no turning back now. He couldn't trust the HOA. He couldn't trust the police. If he wanted the truth, he'd have to find it himself, even if it meant risking everything. Somewhere, beneath the concrete and lies, the real story waited to surface. The morning after the break-in, David felt like a ghost in his own house. Every sound made him jump, the ticking clock, the creak of the floor, even the dripping faucet. He hadn't slept. The note on his desk still burned in his mind. "You live here because we allow it." He stared at the muddy water outside his window. It was higher now, touching his fence, inching closer to the porch. The swamp was swallowing the neighborhood 1 inch at a time. He knew one thing. Fear was exactly what they wanted, and he wasn't going to give it to them. David decided to keep a low profile. He acted normal, went to work, mowed his lawn, waved at neighbors. But every night, he studied the few photos he'd managed to save on his phone, the concrete creek, the contracts, and the signatures. He needed a new plan, and maybe a new ally. 2 days later, While checking his mailbox, a quiet voice spoke behind him. "You shouldn't have gone to the shed." David turned sharply. It was Mark Benson, a younger man who worked for the HOA as a maintenance supervisor. He was short, nervous-looking, always keeping his eyes down. "What do you mean?" David asked. Mark glanced around before whispering, "They know you took the files. They've been watching you." Brooks is furious. David's chest tightened. "Then why are you telling me this?" Mark sighed. "Because I used to believe in what we were doing, until I found out what the project was really for." David studied him carefully. "You know about the creek?" Mark nodded. "I was part of the crew that helped seal it. Brooks told us it was temporary, said we were building a foundation for a new drainage system. But weeks passed, and no new pipes came. Then, one morning, he told us to cover it up completely. When I asked why, he said, 'Don't ask questions if you like your job.'" David leaned in. "Why would he do that?" Mark hesitated, then pulled out his phone and showed David a photo. It was a map, the neighborhood and the land behind it. A large red area was marked Future Development Zone. "He's planning to sell that land," Mark whispered, "but the creek ran through it. He needed it gone to make the land usable. So he filled it with your money." David's pulse quickened. "So the flooding isn't an accident. It's the side effect." "Exactly," Mark said. "But there's more. Brooks has friends on the city council. They approved the permits. Everything looks legal on paper." David took a deep breath. "Can you help me prove it?" Mark looked scared. "If they find out I talked, I'll lose everything." "Then let's make sure they don't find out," David said firmly. That night, the two men met secretly at the old park, near the edge of the neighborhood. It was quiet except for the sound of frogs and the faint rustle of trees. Mark brought a flash drive. "It has copies of all project documents," he said. "Emails, invoices, plans. You'll see Brooks' signature everywhere." David took it carefully. "You're doing the right thing, Mark." Mark gave a weak smile. "Just make it count." As they left, a faint click came from the distance like a camera shutter. Both froze. They looked around, but saw nothing. Still, the sound lingered in their minds. Someone had been there. Watching the next day, David's phone buzzed with a new message. No name, no number. "We warned you once. Last chance." He showed it to Mark. "They're getting nervous." "That means we're close?" Mark said quietly. That evening, David copied the files to a cloud drive and printed several pages. He mailed one envelope to Sarah Mitchell, the journalist who never showed up, and another to a friend at the local news station. He didn't know if anyone would believe him, but he couldn't stay silent anymore. As he looked out at the water under the moonlight, something strange caught his eye. The reflection of red and blue lights in the distance. Police cars. They were coming down the street, stopping at his house. David's breath caught. He whispered, "They're not here to help." "Are they?" Before he could move, a voice shouted through a megaphone, "David Carter, step outside with your hands visible." Blue and red lights flashed through David's living room curtains like a silent storm. He stood frozen near the doorway, heart pounding, papers scattered across the table. Outside, the sound of car doors slamming echoed through the night. "David Carter, step outside with your hands visible," a police officer repeated through the megaphone. David's mind spun. Why were they here? He hadn't done anything wrong, unless someone had made it look like he did. He raised his shaking hands and stepped out into the rain. Cold drops ran down his face as two officers approached, his flashlights shining into his eyes. "Sir, we have a warrant to search your property," one of them said flatly. "We received a report of stolen HOA property and illegal entry." "Stolen?" David stammered. "I didn't steal anything." "Aye, sir. Please step aside." They pushed past him and entered his house. Within minutes, they were pulling out boxes, folders, even his laptop. The officer in charge handed him a paper. "Signed by President Richard Brooks," he said. "You're being accused of trespassing and theft of confidential community documents." David's stomach twisted. Brooks had done it. He had turned the tables. He tried to speak, but the officer's tone was cold. Anything you say can be used against you." As they led him to the police car, neighbors peeked from behind curtains. Some whispered, others filmed. The man who had fought for them now looked like a criminal. Inside the car, rain hit the windows in slow, heavy drops. David stared ahead, silent as the world outside blurred. He wasn't angry anymore, he was determined. At the station, they questioned him for hours. Every answer he gave only seemed to make things worse. "You admit you entered HOA property." "Yes, but I was looking for evidence." "So you confessed you broke in?" "No, Mr. Carter. Please stick to the facts." They twisted his words until truth and lies became the same thing. When the questioning ended, he was allowed one call. He dialed Mark. "Mark, they set me up," he said in a low voice. "They found the files." Mark whispered, "I know." Brooks called an emergency board meeting. "He's saying you hacked the HOA records." "Hacked?" David gasped. "That's insane." Mark hesitated. "He's convincing people." "But listen, the flash drive I gave you wasn't the only copy. I have a backup. Hidden." David exhaled shakily. "Then get it out. Take it to someone you trust. Don't come here. They'll watch you." "I will," Mark promised. "Hold on, David, I'll fix this." Hours later, David sat alone in a cold holding cell. The concrete walls echoed every sound. Footsteps, keys, rain tapping the window. He thought about his father's words from years ago. Doing what's right doesn't always keep you safe, but it keeps you human by morning. He was released on bail. No proof yet, just suspicion. But his name was already tarnished. Local blogs had headlines waiting. "Homeowner arrested in HOA break-in." When he returned home, his yard looked worse than ever. Water had reached his steps. The mailbox leaned sideways. Someone had spray-painted "Troublemaker" on his fence. David sighed, shoulders heavy. He walked inside and found another envelope on the floor. No address, no name, just one photo inside, a picture of him and Mark at the park. Written across the bottom in red marker were 3 words, "You are next." He dropped the photo. At that moment, his phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. "Meet me at the old gas station. 10 p.m. I can help you." David didn't know if it was a trap or a chance, but he was out of options. At exactly 10, he drove to the gas station on the edge of town. The lights flickered weakly. The place smelled of rust and rain. A lone car waited in the corner, headlights off. He stepped out slowly, clutching his jacket tight. The driver's door opened, and a figure stepped out. It was Sarah Mitchell, the journalist who never came to the cafe. "David," she said quietly, "I know what they did to you. I didn't show up because someone followed me. But I have proof now, and we don't have much time." David's heart raced. "You have the files?" She nodded. "Not just the files. Videos, meetings, everything. Brooks isn't just stealing money, he's laundering it through fake projects." Thunder cracked in the distance. For the first time in weeks, David felt something new hope. But before he could speak, a black SUV turned the corner. Speeding toward them with its lights off, Sarah's eyes widened. "They found us." The black SUV sped toward the gas station, tires screeching on the wet road. David's pulse quickened as he grabbed Sarah's arm. "Run," he shouted. They sprinted behind the old convenience store, splashing through puddles. The SUV skidded to a stop, and 2 men stepped out, flashlights cutting through the darkness, spread out. One of them barked. Sarah and David ducked behind a dumpster, breathing hard. The rain poured harder, drowning the sound of their footsteps. Sarah clutched her bag tightly. "I copied everything onto this drive," she whispered. "It has every meeting, every payment Brooks made. Even the video where he says the creek was cheaper to fill than to fix." David stared at her, stunned. "That's enough to destroy him." Sarah nodded. "If we can get it out before they get us." The men's voices grew closer. David looked around, then spotted an old maintenance tunnel behind the building, half flooded, but open. "In there," he whispered. They crawled through the narrow tunnel, water soaking their clothes. It smelled like rust and decay. But it led them to a quiet alley behind the station. When they finally emerged, they could hear the SUV driving off in the opposite direction. They were safe for now. Sarah caught her breath. We can't go home. They'll expect that, David thought for a moment. Mark. We'll go to Mark. He has the backup files. They drove across town in silence, headlights cutting through the mist. Every shadow felt alive. When they reached Mark's small apartment, the door was ajar. David's chest tightened. Mark. He called softly, no answer. They stepped inside. The lights were off, and the air smelled faintly of smoke. On the table was a single flash drive, the same kind Mark had given him before. Next to it was a note, written in shaky handwriting. They found me. Use this. End it. Sarah covered her mouth. Oh no. David clenched his fists. We can't let this be for nothing. They took the drive and headed to a nearby 24-hour library with public computers. There, in a corner cubicle, Sarah plugged it in. The screen lit up dozens of files, videos, and scanned documents. One folder was titled HOA Board Meeting, Confidential. They opened it. On the video, Brooks sat at a long wooden table surrounded by board members. His voice was calm, almost casual. The creek is a problem, he said. If we reroute it, we lose land. If we fill it, we gain value. People will complain, but they'll stop once they realize they can't win. Another man asked, what about the flooding? Brooks smirked. Flooding is temporary. Profit is permanent. Sarah stared at the screen, her eyes wide. This is it. This is the proof. They uploaded the video to multiple news outlets and cloud servers. Sarah also sent it to her editor, along with every document. Once it's out there, she said, they can't hide it anymore. Suddenly the library lights flickered. David turned toward the glass doors and saw Brooks standing outside, talking to someone on his phone. His calm smile was gone. They found us, David whispered. Sarah clicked send on the final file. Too late. It's done. Brooks entered with 2 officers. You're making a huge mistake, Carter, he hissed. You think anyone will believe a man who broke into private property? Sarah stood tall. They'll believe the video. Brooks froze. His phone buzzed. He looked down and saw notifications flooding his screen. News alerts, social media posts, his own face in headlines. The color drained from his face. Within hours, the story exploded online. HOA president exposed in creek cover-up. Residents left flooded after profit scheme. Investigations began immediately. Brooks was removed from his position, then arrested for fraud, environmental damage, embezzlement. Weeks later, the creek was finally reopened. Workers dug through layers of concrete, letting the water flow again. Slowly, the swamps drained, and green returned to the lawns. David stood by the water's edge, watching it ripple in the sunlight. The neighborhood was quiet again, but not the same. Some homes were still damaged, some people still angry. But the truth had finally broken through. Sarah joined him, smiling softly. You did it. David shook his head. Did. And so did Mark. They watched the current flow gently down the creek, carrying leaves and light with it, a sign that nature, at least, had forgiven what greed had buried. David took a deep breath and said quietly, the truth always finds a way out, even through concrete. And with that, the camera could have faded, the swamp now a stream, the lies washed away. And a man who refused to stay silent, standing where the truth finally flowed free.